Hi, it's Professor Fox again. You might wonder why I keep calling myself Professor Fox, because Edel is my spouse's name and I've never used it. I've always used Fox. But for some reason, when I moved to Florida, um, legally I had to keep putting Edel at the end of the name. So I'm just not used to it. And so I always sign myself Fox. So that's the reason why that happens. So, I'm here to talk to you about the rhetorical analysis, which is project two. And what I want to make clear about the rhetorical analysis before we begin talking about it is that this is the required paper in 1102. So, everyone who takes 1102 needs to write a rhetorical analysis. But there's a reason why it's required, not just to make your life more complex than it already is, but also because rhetorical analysis is the most critical way that you can look at something that is being shown to you, or listen to something that's being told to you, or at the same time construct your own statements, your own arguments. Um, this this method of analysis goes back to the very first, earliest times when we as human beings began looking at how we communicate with each other. So rhetorical analysis is actually a classic project that goes back over 2,500 years. Although rhetoric is a global phenomenon, which is what you learned when you read rhetorical DNA in week two, the analysis of it goes right back to the Greeks, okay, because they were very scientific in their thinking, very philosophical in their thinking. So a lot of the questions that we have learned to ask about ourselves, who we are, why are we here, how do we create the best kinds of societies together, how do we get along in a democracy without killing each other, those are very valid questions, and they're very deep ones and very old ones, and they do go back because our method of thinking, our democracy, our community, how we live together, our most basic values were first articulated in that particular culture. So there's a straight line that comes right from them to us, and it's necessary for you to know that. The other thing is that rhetorical analysis allows you, because as you learned in your reading, rhetoric is the way that we affect one another. It's what we do, how we design what it is we say and show and film, in order to connect with one another, to contact one another. We're very solitary, right? We're individuals, but those individuals need to make a community. We've known that. I mean, that's part of our nature as human beings. So rhetorical analysis allows you to understand what's going on in the statements that we make, in what we hear, in what we experience. And there's a very specific way when you write a rhetorical analysis. There's a very specific way that you do that. So I'm sure that you heard before you came into my class, the very basic type of rhetorical analysis is when you look at something that you're reading, or something that someone says, or a film, or an ad, or something like this, and you look at it for the three appeals. The Greek word for this is the pisteis, where they're the three appeals. They were defined by Aristotle in his book on rhetoric, and they are ethos, which is the how does someone who is talking to you or giving you something to read or look at, how does that person build trust and credibility? The Greeks believed that trust and credibility are foundational, and that if you don't trust the person who's speaking to you, none of the other ones matter. So they valued ethos, prized it most of all. I'm not sure that they considered it the strongest appeal, but I think that they considered it, the most fundamental one. And so when you look for ethos, you're not only looking for how credible is this person, but you're also looking at how the person is able to establish a connection with the audience, good feeling. So for example, somebody might be running for office, and that person might not have, a particularly noteworthy past. They might have something, a lot of things in their past that are questionable. So they don't get their ethos from that, but they might get their ethos from the fact that they can get in front of an audience and they can connect with that audience, and they can establish some sort of a good fellow feeling with that audience. I mean, that's also a function of ethos. So ethos is there's also, the ethos of I've done this for 150 years and I know what I'm doing, and that kind of thing. And we also look for that. So ethos works on several different levels, and the thing that you'll come to know about each one of these appeals is that they do work on a couple different levels. They're not easy, they're not simple. Neither are we. Okay. The next one is pathos. Pathos is the emotional appeal. This is considered the strongest one. It's also the most dangerous. It can bypass all the others, because if somebody can connect with us on an emotional level, and it doesn't, I mean, as you know, emotions don't always tickle. So somebody can connect with us and can conjure our anger, conjure our feelings of pride. They can go to where we feel most insecure, and they can speak to that, so something can appeal to those emotional parts of us so that we basically stop thinking. So if you ever wonder why large groups of people, will get involved in something, and emotions run really high, and they stop thinking, and we start acting like a herd. That's what pathos can do that. So if you wonder why people, say join ISIS, even because, despite the, terrible things that they do, and, the terrible living conditions, and all of that, it's emotion. And maybe you'll see in our campaign, maybe you'll political campaigns, maybe you'll see, the other night there was a rally. And there were a group of people who shouted down, the people who were speaking. There, the emotion of the moment took over. And if you ever wonder why there was a Hitler, how could an entire nation forget its values and start hating other people and putting up walls between each other? That happens because pathos. If somebody can click into, can go right into an emotion and stir people up, and people act without thinking. We have that capacity. Now, it's not always that extreme. I mean, why do you buy a particular, car, or why do you, buy a particular brand of clothing? I mean, because of pathos, it'll go in and appeal to you as a member of a generation, an age, a gender, and so on. And finally, logos. Logos is the oldest one. It's the oldest word. It's beautiful. There's a sacredness to logos. They want to get religious about it, but there's a logos theology. In the beginning was the word. There's the idea of the word as sacred, as given to us, as an ancient idea. Logos is the content. I don't want you to confuse it with logic. It's not logic. Logic is mathematical. You may have noticed we are not mathematical. We are not logical creatures. Other things move us. Other things stir us. Stories stir us. And stories aren't logical. We're not logical. We can use logic as a tool if we're doing science or math. But when we're telling stories, there isn't a logic, not scientific logic to that. So logos is the material. It can be data, it can be statistics, it can be a logical type of information, but it can also be a first person account of something. Look at what you're posting about your stories. Look at what you posted about yourself as a reader. Look at what you posted about what you were reading. Look at what you're posting now on Facebook about a place that you've gone and why it matters. That's all logos. All that information is logos, including the pictures. So logos, the content of everything you see behind me, is logos. But there are two others that are very interesting. All right, there are those three. But I have on the first week of project two, the first week of project two, where you're going to write your 1-page single spaced and not a big long block of white space at the top. It should be a complete 1-page rhetorical analysis of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. So I want you to read the speech, and there's a film clip of the speech. I want you to listen to it. And then there is a page of different questions. Let me get this over here so you can see it. Questions to help you come to what you want to talk about in your rhetorical analysis. You're going to focus on one of these strategies in your paper. You can write your entire paper on King's use of ethos. You can write your entire paper on King's use of pathos or logos. But there are some other ones, and so what I want you to do after you've looked at the King speech, I want you to take a look at each of these questions. This is posted, there's a link to it. What's the subject? There's always a subject. There's always something being discussed. We demand that of each other. If we don't have it, we'll say, what the heck are you talking about? Come to the point. There needs to be a subject. There needs to be a purpose. For it to be rhetorical, there has to be a purpose. There has to be a design to it. There has to be a reason for the text to exist. All right, so what is the purpose? What's the project? What is he doing? What's he up to? What is he putting together? What is he creating up there? How does he use him? How does he appeal to the audience's emotion? How does he appeal to their feelings? Their feelings in this case of being left out, of being marginalized, of being made secondary in a country where everybody, according to our founding documents, is primary. What happens when one group dominates another group? Attempts to anyway, Speaking to that. What's the emotion there? What's his argument? He's making an argument. He's got a central argument in there. What is that? How does he use evidence? He uses a lot of evidence. This is a man who, not only was a classics scholar, so he knows his rhetoric, he knows exactly what he's doing, but he is also a minister. And so he could make reference not only to our historical documents, but he could also make reference to our religious documents, our Christian religious tradition. Now that's not the only religious tradition in our country. Our country is composed, we have religious freedom. So, right, so I'm free to believe or not believe. I'm free to be a Christian or to be an atheist. I'm free to be whatever I want, However, he knows his audience, and his audience is primarily a Baptist Christian audience. That's his background. And so that's what he's using. If he were addressing another crowd, because audience is another purpose here, if he were addressing another type of crowd, he might not make reference to those documents because they wouldn't have the same meaning. If he were addressing a Jewish crowd, if he were addressing a Muslim crowd, if he were addressing a crowd that is non-denominational, those texts wouldn't have the same kind of emotional power that they have with the audience that he's addressing. So what you can see in him is I think probably one of the most important things to know about the rhetorical appeals, and that is you don't talk just because you're, as my daughter says, yapping off at the jib. You're not just talking to make your point and enforce and coerce. you know, enforce that point on your audience. You're talking to persuade. You're talking to win an argument without a war. And so what you need to do is you need to know who that audience is, and you speak to their values. You don't try to impose yours. You're not in the business of of having them, um, of co-opting them, or forcing them to your point of view. That's not rhetoric. Rhetoric is that you know your audience, you have a purpose, and you speak to who they are to try and bring them over, at least to understand what it is you're saying. There are two other important appeals that you might be interested in writing about. One is, how something is very urgent, necessary, relevant at a particular time. That the name of that type of strategy is kairos. The kairos of a situation. So he's giving his speech. He's giving the "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963 at the dawn of the civil rights movement. Of course, he doesn't know. He doesn't know that what's going to. He hopes that there's going to be some sort of movement, some sort of response, but he doesn't know it's going to happen. He can't see into the future. He also doesn't know that in 5 years he's going to be shot dead for what he has to say at this particular speech. He can't see that. He does not know. What he knows is what's at that moment, and that at that moment, what he has to tell that particular crowd, to enable them, to lift up from where they have felt oppressed, to lift themselves up and start to fight but do it nonviolently. I mean, that was his key, so kairos, the timing of a particular speech, and place. I mean, there he is. You see it. He's in Washington. Okay, he's in the Ellipse. There's the Washington Monument. There's a Lincoln Memorial. I mean, there's all of the reasons that he has, for why everyone, can and should aspire to equal rights and to justice in the United States. Is right there in that spot, right there at that time. That's kairos. The other one is an interesting one, and it's called nomos, Nomos. That is how does it conform to a cultural value that we have? Nomos is a cultural value. It's a strategy where if you're giving a speech, and you're giving a speech to a group of Americans, and so you focus on our value and ideal of justice and equal rights, you're using the strategy nomos. Nomos is what we value as a community, what we value as a culture, and so you make an argument based on that particular value. So that would also be a very interesting paper. I want to talk you through the paper. The paper is a one-page rhetorical analysis. You are not asked to give your opinion. All right. Some of you who have done the extra credit assignments may have noticed by now at the bottom of it, I always say, don't make an argument. Don't give your opinion. Focus on how the text is working. You want to look at these texts as if they're little machines. You're not here to give your opinion about whether you think King is right or wrong. You're here to tell us how brilliantly he designed this speech. That's your purpose. And how this speech fits that audience and fits that time. There is a reason why, we are still talking about this speech, and we are still viewing this speech how many years later, 50 some years later. I'm not good at math. I'm not going to do it right now, but we're 50 years later. Okay, 53, I guess, years later. So maybe I'm not so bad at math. There's a reason that we're still looking at this speech. There are things that happen in this speech that are brilliantly done. And that's where your focus is. How he succeeded in creating and designing this speech that started an entire movement that changed our history, and we are still looking at how he did it. all these years later. All right. So keep in mind, your function is to show how he put this together as if he were building a watch. And you're going to keep your own emotions out of it and just look at what he does, because what he does, is that's what's of interest here. This is not a paper about you. This is a paper about his design and his speech and how he made it effective. Okay, so you're talking about, I'm going to hold this up so that you can see it, I hope. Okay. It's hard because this is the screen is it's like I don't know, it's weirder than a mirror image. Anyway, so here we go. So you're going to compose a one-page single-spaced paper. You have to follow the guidelines. All right. The best example that I can give, is, so if you're playing football, you can't just, oh, I love football, and go out and run around the field and run after the person that has the ball and think you're playing football. There are specific plays, there's training, there's practice, there are certain specific moves that you need to make. And the same thing is true when you're writing a rhetorical analysis paper. So I don't want you to just sit down and go. You have to follow this guideline. Okay. All right, so it should be let me get it here. It should be one page, single spaced. All right, you should have a 12-point font. There should not be 3 inches of white space at the top of the paper. Don't forget the title, and you can use the word I. I prefer it. I want you to begin to use I when you're writing an argument or when you're writing an analysis. All right, and here is what the first part of the paper should look like. This is online, but I'm just going to walk you through it. Okay, there's an introduction. The introduction should be 3 to 5 sentences. You must always identify the text and the author. You must always tell us what the text is about. Then you must tell us what rhetorical strategy you yourself are going to focus on and why this is important. Do you see the thesis here? Your thesis should follow this template exactly. Your thesis should say, in this paper, I will, describe the importance of whatever the strategy is, all right? And what are you going to show? How does this strategy serve his larger argument? Why should we pay attention to it? This is your opening statement. Your thesis should look like this. This is a classic thesis, and you need to write it. All right, you should have the word I in it. I know that it's really uncomfortable for some of you. You've had very good English teachers in the past that really, the reason is because they wanted your opinion out of it, and they want you just focusing on the text, so you couldn't use the word I. But I want you to use the word I. All right, the middle of the paper should also be, there should be like 3 to 5 sentences. All right, I prefer 5, but now get specific. Prove that this particular strategy is used in the text. Give the example. Don't give a giant block of text that is going to fill up that page. All right, use quotes judiciously, but show in the text where he uses whatever strategy, if it's pathos, kairos, whatever it is you're using, if you're talking about his focus on audience, whatever it is, okay? And then tell us, why you're showing it and this particular moment in his speech and why it's important and why it matters. Then comes your conclusion. Your conclusion, couple of sentences, and this is not where you come in and say that you agree or disagree. This is where you come in and you say how this strategy, affected the design and the impact of the overall statement. What are the stakes of that argument? Stakes, high stakes poker, there's a chance you're going to lose your shirt. The same thing is true when you're making an argument. There are stakes to it. There's an importance to it. There's a risk. So why is this so vital for the people that are listening to him? Not you, not us now. Although, certainly you can mention the fact that here we are, 53 years later, we're still amazed at this, and we're studying this, and treasuring this speech, and we're grateful that this is part of our history. These words are part of our history as not only human beings but as Americans. So that can come in. But there has to be a sense of this as the powerful speech created by him. Right. So that's what your rhetorical analysis needs to be, and it does need to follow the format. And this is there. The link is there. The prompt is there, and that'll show you how you put the paper together. If you have any questions at all, please do. I'm good. You know by now I'm really good at answering my email. So please do send it to me, and keep this in mind. One of my students in San Diego, who I taught a long time ago, at the end of the course said, once you open the door of rhetoric, you can't ever close it again. And that's true. Once you begin to analyze and you begin to see how, information works, you're doing it too. You have all of these elements in what you say. I look at it sometimes when you're posting on Facebook. I look at it and I see how you're pushing. You can call each of these a rhetorical button. You're pushing each of those buttons. You do it all the time, and so now what you're doing is you're learning how to put the words to it. So my final piece of advice, instruction, direction, is that I want you to use the course vocabulary. So please don't talk around it. There's nothing good about pretending that you're less intelligent or educated than you are. As President Obama said, in his graduation speech at Rutgers a couple days ago, there's nothing good, there's nothing cool about pretending that you're not smart, or not valuing being smart. There's nothing good about that. So use the words. If you're talking about the emotional appeal, use the word pathos. If you're talking about evidence or story, use the word logos. Right? And if you have any questions at all, you know where to find me.